how are you, man? I'm Gil Roth, and you're listening to a bonus episode of my Virtual Memories Show podcast. This is a COVID check-in episode where I record with a past guest of the Virtual Memories Show to find out how they're holding up during the pandemic. As far as how I'm doing, I'm okay. Got out of yesterday's beating myself up spiral, mainly by getting a 6-mile run in right after posting the episode where I talked about that. That got me pretty charged up, plus it cut down the time I had available for everything else, which got me working more efficiently, less ruminating and beating myself up, etc. Or so I think. In other words, I'm ready for a long weekend, whatever that means. I hope you're able to make it a little special, this whole Memorial Day thing, or otherwise different than your day-to-day routine, given that we're all in that weird days blending together, time has no meaning vortex. But I also hope you do it without risking your or anyone else's safety and health. Now let's get to today's guest. Documentary photographer Jonathan Hyman is joining me from Bethel, New York, or Bethel, I always forget. Jonathan and I connected many, many years ago when he was working on a project about 9/11 related tattoos. I have one, albeit a boring one, so a pal who noticed it hooked us up. Jonathan was also photographing 9/11 murals and other art and symbols around the event and that era, for which he's done a book, exhibitions, etc. And they're some pretty haunting and amazing photography. Anyway, now Jonathan is visiting cities and towns and photographing pandemic life, as well as the End the Quarantine, Open the Economy rallies. He does interviews as part of this project, and some of his pictures are run in local news. It's really challenging work, and we get into that with the in-the-moment awareness of COVID risk, anti-media bias, the physical wear of driving up and down the Northeast, and he has gone all over the place, as he'll tell you. And what I imagine is also the anxiety of staying in hotels or motels during this time. A little like when I recorded with Kyle Cassidy down in Philadelphia a couple of weeks ago. There's that sense that this is the thing he does, the thing that he's good at, and just sitting at home isn't going to cut it. So I give all kudos to Jonathan for the risks he's taking to go chronicle this era, and to try to not show both sides, but to be as objective as photography can be, I guess, which is a notion we get into over the course of this conversation. Now, as caveats go, his audio gets a little noisy in parts, and his phone goes off once or twice, but that's about it. And here's me and Jonathan. Tell me about, your process, as we first moved into the lockdown and quarantine and all that.
Well, I'm dealing the best I can. And I find again, Gil, like I did many, many years ago, that many people's and the nation's misfortune is an opportunity for me. Mm-hmm. I have been as careful and as respectful of that as I was when I did my 9/11 related project. Respectful of individual people, careful to the point that I always make when I post some of my pictures, which says, photographer wears an N95 mask and follows all medical and social protocols with regard to social distancing. I have a number of rituals I perform when I'm on the road to make sure that my car is disinfected, that when I go to a hotel, I'm wiping down and I'm quarantining my clothing after using it for a day. So I'm very, very careful and respectful of people and this god-awful virus. Go ahead. Sorry.
I was going to say, just, how soon from when we went into lockdown did you start heading out to start shooting? And you could talk about the shooting and what you're doing actually as part of that.
Yeah, sure. Well, like everybody else, I was watching very closely what was going on and reading a lot and trying to learn about my position in the world with regard to the coronavirus. Of course, my family's position as well. Having two parents in separate dementia care facilities didn't didn't help. And so I had to learn a little bit about how they were going to live. But I knew I was going to do something. I didn't know what. I didn't know the extent to which the lockdown, to what kind of a lockdown it would be, or what kind of, I guess, government imposed restrictions there would be. And then, I was out and about, very carefully practicing social distancing. And then it occurred to me, after speaking to a few people and thinking that there's something I should be doing, I didn't know what it was. A friend of mine told me that this St. Patrick's Day, March 17th, I think it was, would be the first St. Patty's Day parade in 250 years in New York City that wasn't going to have a St. Patrick's Day. Mm-hmm. And I thought that would be different. And I like, as you probably remember, I like things that are in between. I like things that are a little messy. Yeah. And so I like my pictures to be a little messy, but I decided, and I had a friend who volunteered because she's a filmmaker and was interested in getting some video footage and also interested in seeing what I was doing. So she drove me over the GW Bridge early on St. Patrick's Day. And she accompanied me as I photographed my way down on Broadway, from the George Washington Bridge all the way to Canal Street. We hit some side streets. I hit a couple different neighborhoods harder than other neighborhoods. And it was this very interesting, eerie kind of thing because it was the next day when the city shut down. So it's this kind of in-between period where there were people around. Not many people wearing masks, but not many people around. Times Square was mostly deserted. And I liked that. And I got a lot accomplished, and I learned a lot about how I would need to work in terms of my own safety and approaching people. And a lot of the same things that I learned over the last 2 decades, pointing a camera at people and their car and their property and their businesses still applied, except this time around there are health and safety issues. And the problem really has been, and I can tell you that I've put myself in a bit of danger, not just because I'm interested in going into neighborhoods to show what the other side of coronavirus looks like, where there's poverty, not just people pushing strollers in parks or walking their dogs around the block or in dog parks. The problem is that there's nothing to rally around. The last time around after the 9/11 attacks, when everybody was very skittish and nervous, I could say things like, I'm working on a book on flags. And we could agree, even if people didn't want to see me in their neighborhood, that terrorism was bad and that it was bad for the country what happened. But this time around, there's more of a kind of a swirling kind of self-interest, shall I say, where people just like, get out of my way, don't get too close. And by the way, what are you doing in my neighborhood? Right. So there's all of these things up in the air. I go to New York, I look at the pictures, and I say, I got to do something next. What will it be? So I made a similar decision that I made right after the 9/11 attacks. I saw the pictures coming out of New York, and largely they were very much the same. Empty streets, the eerie New York City, Times Square shots. But where I live, 90 to 100 miles away in the lower tier of upstate New York, all around me, in my neighborhood, in my community, and in neighboring communities, there was really a very vibrant life going on. Not much changed. Yes, school was canceled, but people were out and about. Not in defiance originally. Now there's a lot of people out and about in defiance. But there's this life going on that I felt need to be chronicled. So I made the decision not to go back to New York. And in fact, I'm going to New York tomorrow for the first time since March 17th. And instead, what I've done is I'm visiting little villages, little towns, and mid-sized and large cities everywhere but New York. I can tell you more about that if you want me to go on, or do you want to ask me something?
No, tell me about how where you've gone, what the process has been like, and what you've seen.
Well, the process has been an interesting process for me personally because I'm integrating all of the things that I've been working on already. One of the things I realized many years into my 9/11 related project was that I was actually cataloging things, cataloging tattoos, cataloging murals. And I wasn't really, after a while, very interested in the beautiful mural or the perfect picture. That's part of the reason why I stopped being a fine art painter. I have my MFA in painting, but I was torturing myself in my studio, always trying to make a perfect painting. I learned how not to make a perfect photograph. As I said, I like them a little messy. I never learned how to do that with my painting, which is why I eventually gave it up. So anyway, so I'm cataloging things, and I've been cataloging and working on projects like been working on the POW MIA flag. I've been working on a project that I started in the run-up to the 2016 election, where I followed all things pro and anti Donald Trump. So I've been photographing, for instance, women's marches all over the East Coast every year. So I decided I needed something to focus on to give me a reason to get out on the road and travel. So what I've been doing, Gil, is I've been to 5 pro-Trump, end the quarantine, open up the economy rallies. So I've been to Augusta, Maine, Allentown, Pennsylvania, Binghamton, New York. I just got back from Annapolis, Maryland, as I told you earlier in communication. And I've also been to Boston. So I use these trips because I'm on websites and I'm connected to people who talk to me. And they talk to me because I don't make judgments. I just do a lot of listening. And occasionally I'll send a picture if someone asks. So then I go to all points in between. So, for instance, when I went to Augusta, Maine, a friend told me I better get up to Augusta, the Maine's state capital, because Maine was starting to look like Michigan. People were very, very, very angry with their governor, and they were raising a lot of hell. So I got up there, but I also visited Massachusetts. I visited New Hampshire, and took pictures along the way. And along the way, in addition to the kind of rituals and speech and signage that I'm photographing in these open the economy pro-Trump rallies, is I'm also looking at the way people practice certain cultural things like their religion, or, for instance, the new kind of drive-by birthday parties. I'm interested in these kind of newly found ways that people are socializing through, let's call them constructive rituals. So that's what I've been doing.
And what have you learned? I mean, besides the ritual thing, besides getting great pictures, what have you come away with?
Well, what I won't talk about is my personal politics.
No, you said listening without making judgments. I'm with you.
We could do that another time, but what I will tell you is that what I've learned for me, is that there are a lot of very, very angry people. And they're not just people who are, pro-Trump, open up the economy people who are angry. There are people on the other side of the coin who are very angry. In fact, one of the things I didn't tell you was that I was in Ithaca, New York, and I photographed what they call a rent strike rally. It was one more of a further left kind of rally. So there are people, advocating vociferously one way or another for, what their beliefs are. I can tell you that we are a nation that so far as I can tell from the kind of interactions I'm having, we're a nation, people that on one side has no faith in the press or photographers who work in the press. I'm asked all the time at the Trump rallies, are you a fake news reporter, or are you a
yeah.
No, they come right at me.
Yeah.
And I think that's the other thing I've learned is that I have a lot of people coming at me. Like I said, there's no bridge, there's no gap. We can't rally around the flag. We can't say terrorism is bad. And so I've learned
is
a
it
different
surprising
kind of.
To you?
No, what I will say is, given the very, very polarized presidency that we're living through, for good or for bad, none of this surprises me. I can tell you that I've also learned something else, and that is that we're a culture, and I don't mean this to be anything other than my own anecdotal impression, but we're a culture that's gotten very, very, very far away from separation of church and state. That's very clear to me from going to these rallies and from going to other kinds of rallies and from speaking to, or more, less speaking, but listening to people. I've also learned something else, and I say this with great respect, by the way. In the entire time I've been doing this, for several months, I've not once been pulled over by the police. And they should have pulled me over a couple of times already.
Just in terms of speeding, or because you're a sketchy character? Okay.
Because I'm in places where a guy like me shouldn't be.
Sure.
Because they've seen me go around the block 10 times. And it's clear that sometimes I could very clearly look like someone who's trying to score drugs. It's clear that, what I'm doing is messy,
Yeah.
And so I think they've made good judgments. I think they've said, you know what? We got bigger things to worry about right now. We're going to just keep our eye on that guy. But I'm really quite surprised. And I think that, you're seeing a lot, notwithstanding whatever happens in neighborhoods that I've been to in Baltimore or Allentown, Pennsylvania, or where else? In Wilmington, Delaware, where clearly there's, a lot of, bad relations between the population and the police, notwithstanding whatever goes on when there wasn't coronavirus. I can tell you that the police are taking a very hands-off approach. I've seen all kinds of things that people are doing, including setting up bars on the sidewalk. All kinds of, newfound, shall we say, creative rituals to socially distance, but still, have a social life and a social presence that the police have very much been hands off on. So that is also something I didn't expect.
Yeah, I can imagine that's a balancing act for them in terms of, if we let them vent, let people vent like this and make, as long as they're doing it in a safe enough manner, that's a lot better than coming down like assholes and then starting a riot and everybody ends up getting hurt. So,
well, I think that's a combination of lessons learned through community policing, in the several year run up or decades run up to, to the coronavirus crisis or COVID crisis. But so those are some of the things I'm learning. I'm learning a lot about my own process.
How so?
Well, there's a lot of things that have come together for me, because I was cataloging a lot of different things already. I've been photographing things that interest me, and generally I like people and things that are over the top. I like eccentricity. Yeah. I like. I may have said this to you once before, but I mean, I wouldn't climb Mount Everest without oxygen, or climb Mount Everest. But I'm interested in people who do, right. That kind of thing. So I've been able to narrow down the kinds of things that interest me so that, for instance, I was cataloging mailboxes. I'm interested in people who make things with their hands, but I was photographing all different kinds of mailboxes or things like that. And now I'm only looking at mailboxes that are, made, like kind of constructed to be almost like folk art. People are,
with the wrought iron sculpture around it and all this stuff. And
yes, and mating ducks in wrought iron. Yeah. So I've narrowed down what I'm interested in as a way of accepting that my real interest is in authenticity, really. Mm-hmm. And this is a very, very authentic moment. I mean, we're making this up individually and collectively and culturally as we go along. So I'm still photographing side of the road memorials for people who die in car accidents, for instance. Yeah. But I'm less interested now in the cross on the side of the road that says Aunt Mary died here and giving her date of birth and date of death than I am. And I'm more interested in, for instance, these kind of arrangements on the side of the road that are almost like art installations.
Oh, I passed one while I was running last weekend that I'll send you a picture and a location of in case you feel like coming out here to shoot it, because it was this whole Celtic cross thing set up and everything else. So yeah, I'll make a note of it for you. So.
Right. So anyways, the point is I have to make very good use of my time. I generally go on the road 3 to 4 days. And I can tell you that it's physically, emotionally debilitating. I'm slightly hyperbolic, obviously, but I mean, I'm wiped out by that at that point because I'm having to communicate with people, but stay out of their way. I'm trying to be respectful. I'm taking anywhere from 600 to 1,000 pictures a day. I've got to sort through them. Many of the pictures are repeat from different angles, but I'm also trying again not to be too fine, Fine, too fine with this, because as I did with my 9/11 related work, I immediately hop out of the car and I take a snapshot. I don't think, I don't look, I just take the picture. Sometimes that's my best shot. Sometimes I have to do what I taught myself to do, which is think this way. I say to myself, what's in front of me isn't necessarily as interesting as what might be behind me. Mm-hmm. So, then I'll turn around and think about where I am and what I'm doing and, that kind of a thing. So I've really become, I think, over 20 years, a pretty good practitioner of, shall we say, how do I say this?
Is it photojournalism or is it something else?
Well,
how do you describe what you do, I guess?
Well, I think on some level I have to say I'm a photojournalist, although at this point I'm not sending my pictures every day into an agency. I do have a press pass. I'm working for a regional newspaper up here and I send them stuff, but they're not interested in what I'm doing in Annapolis, Maryland. Right. I wish they were, because there's a story to be told, over time. But I would say this. I would say that, what I'm seeing and what interests me, I think, is red meat for a cultural anthropologist. Mm-hmm. In the end, I mean, New York State banned it, but on Easter Sunday, I drove 2.5 hours to Mountaintop, Pennsylvania, southwest of Scranton, Pennsylvania. And I attended and photographed a parking lot Easter Sunday Mass, where people were in their cars listening on a radio frequency with masks on, most of them, observing and participating in an outdoor mass conducted by,
the priest.
Yeah. No, was it Presbyterian? I don't know that it was a priest, but it was certainly a minister.
Yeah.
I think it was a reverend of some sort with an organ player. And I had this, I have moments like this that are really amazing where I'm up on my 6-foot ladder in the back of the parking lot and a young woman got out of the car in her Sunday best with a mask on, took it off right in front of my ladder, walked up. She sang a beautiful song as part of the mass. Everybody honked their horns when she was done. She smiled and thanked everybody for being, so appreciative. And she put her mask back on and got in the car. It was just these kind of interesting kind of things where cultural practice becomes, let's just say, social reinvention, Yeah. So I'm right in the middle of that. And, for me, it's every day's a new day,
Has pointing a camera at someone changed in the era in which everybody's pointing a phone at someone to take a picture? Does the camera mean something different? Yeah.
Yes, 100%. Nobody really cares when I point a cell phone at them, and no one cares when anybody points a cell phone at them. And I'm glad you asked that question because it's something I never would have remembered to mention. One of the major differences between 2001, when the 9/11 attacks happened, and now is that even 8-year-old kids are aware that if I take their picture, they could very easily end up on Instagram or Facebook and be embarrassed or show something about them they don't want or look not quite the way they want to look. And I started out, in 2001, I was still shooting film and there was no, Facebook to speak of. And, certainly we have evolved, in unbelievable ways. And everybody now is media savvy. And there's something about a professional camera that spooks people. And it didn't used to. People used to find it interesting. Oh, you've got a nice camera. What are you doing? Well, I'm doing this, that, and the other thing. Now people say things to me like, I don't consent to have my picture taken. They've learned all the cultural norms to do. But of course, they don't realize is that if they're out in public at a pro-Trump rally, they don't have much of a choice. Right. I'm going to take their picture. And in fact, it's news because I am a photojournalist and it's news. What they don't understand is that I don't have the right to make a poster and sell it of their face and profit off of their likeness. But they're out in public, and they're a fair game to be photographed, but they don't realize that. So people really, it's a kind of a mediation socially and professionally for me. So just the other day, I was inside of a hamburger joint where I grew up, and I did not bring my camera in. I took some pictures outside with my professional camera, and I went inside and I shot my cell phone pictures, and nobody even blinked. But I can guarantee you that, and it's happened to me already, where people say, no pictures in this place. Even while there are people behind me in line shooting with their cell phone cameras.
Yeah, I understand.
So it's a very interesting moment, I think, in a lot of ways, because just as it's easier for most people to send a picture online and into cyberspace and social media from your cell phone than it is for me to do it from my professional camera, but nobody understands that.
Yeah, you got to take a memory card out, you got to load and all. Now, do you think part of that, or how much of that, is professional camera equals quote unquote mainstream media? You know, that this is you're part of the mainstream media because you have this professional camera, or is it just the physical artifact of the camera strikes them differently than, everybody's phone?
I would say both, but also I think there's just some suspicion that a person like me is out there trying to use them.
Yeah.
So like if my daughter were behind me taking cell phone pictures, they'd say, who cares, But there's this kind of suspicion that people are going to get entangled somehow in something they didn't sign up for.
Yeah.
And I think just in general, no one signed up for the coronavirus, but that's a whole nother thing. And as I said, this is the reason why people are coming at me all the time, which is it's always been an aggressive act to point a camera, as I said, at someone's face or their car or whatever. So I try to head people off at the pass. And there are people I have to approach because I clearly can feel the danger or the apprehension. And they say, no, I'm not interested. And I say, okay, very good. And I walk away. But there are other people who say, sure. And there's some people who say, how are you going to use the picture? And very often I get myself in a situation where I have to, send the picture. I make a promise to send the picture and tell people they can use it. It's that whole, thing.
I do that nowadays when I take the picture of the guest. Not nowadays, until 2 months ago when I would do the in-person shows. I would shoot with the guest, take a couple of pictures of them, pictures of us together. And are you going to put this on the website? I'm like, I will send you first and you can tell me which one is okay to use. That's always my if they ask. Other people, they don't give a crap. But, when someone's sensitive about it, I'll make sure they get a chance to look. You mentioned the traveling 3 or 4 days a week. How do you recover when you're back home?
Well, first I disinfect everything before I take it in the house.
Sure. I you still have that garage studio across the street from the house? I'm
sitting in it now as I'm looking out the window.
Yeah. I kind of figure that's a good staging place to put things before bringing them in. So
exactly. I'm in my studio now. I do that. And what I do is I immediately download all my pictures and back them up before I do anything. You can't redo this. It's not like missing. You'll take a picture of a mural in Brooklyn and then you'll lose it. You go back and do it again. These are all entirely ephemeral moments. Mm-hmm. And so generally I sleep. I got to tell you, I come back, I sleep. I spend the whole day. I just have to deprogram. I do a lot. I sleep, and then I start to think about what I saw. And the other thing is that I just came back from this trip from Annapolis to Wilmington, Delaware, to Baltimore, Maryland, and then Philadelphia. And I decided not to put the pictures from Annapolis up where I was shooting this pro-Trump Open the Economy rally. And in fact, of the 5 rallies that I photographed, the only pictures I put up were from the Allentown, Pennsylvania rally. And it was the first one that I shot. And I tried to be, and I thought I was, very, very fair and sympathetic to the people who were there at the rally. As it turns out, counterintuitively, why I was so pleased with myself was that only 20 people showed up to the rally. No one came.
Yeah.
And that in and of itself was great, but it got me an opportunity to get to know a woman who brought her 3 children without masks. She had no mask. And some of the people at the rally had masks, others did not. And I try very, very hard not to pass judgment, both artistically and sort of kind of materially, I have to do a little more thinking about these rallies before I start putting the pictures out there. I really want to make sure, though I don't always agree with the sentiments expressed, you have to make sure that I do this in a way that's respectful.
But you're not editorializing, you mean?
Yeah, well, I've worked so hard for that. In fact, I tell everybody, they've tried, a number of people have tried to co-opt me, both on the left and the right, and I keep saying I pass no judgments. I'm not a fake news person, that kind of thing, when they ask about the fake news thing.
Yeah.
And so what I've learned from hearing other people classify me, on the moment, they say, oh, so you're an independent media person.
Sure.
And I say, that's exactly what I am. So I want to be very careful about that, although, obviously I'm making a public record. But this is something I don't think we spoke about in 2013. But I gave a university-sponsored lecture on the 5-year anniversary of the attacks at Rutgers University. It was sponsored by the American Studies Department and the dean at Mason Gross School of the Arts. And I did at the time, I wasn't even using I was using slides. I was just getting into computerized presentations. And it turns out I didn't know who she was at the time, but it was a photography professor at Mason Gross School of the Arts attacked me. And she raised her hand and she said in the middle of my presentation, I think these pictures are very nice, but I resent this presentation. You're talking about X, Y, and Z, whatever she said I was talking about, but you're not talking about social class repression and the use of the American flag. And my father, had his bar mitzvah denied and canceled in Nazi Germany in 1938. And this is the same thing that people are using the flag for now, and I was like blown away. This is in front of hundreds of people. She just called me out. And I said to her, the reason I'm not talking about that is that's not what this particular presentation is about. Right. And she said, well, I'm a professor at this school at Mason Gross, and we're teaching our students X, Y, and Z. And I said, well, you know what? I haven't thought much about this, but let me tell you what I'll do. I'll bring 2 full slide trays of my slides. I'll run the projector for you, and you can say anything you want to your students about my pictures. That's what I'm there for. I'm really not here to talk about certain things that way. I'm here to talk about interpretation of, why someone may have the burning towers on their back based on stories that I've uncovered. I'm willing to talk about that. But if you want to talk about social class repression and the American flag, you should use my pictures to do it. Yeah. I'll come. Again. Invite me. Right. So that's kind of the position I'm taking, but it's a bit of a dance right now with these Trump rallies because it's cultural dynamite. It's pretty crazy. So, and I don't mean that in a bad way. I mean, it's a mess.
Yeah. It's just very, very chaotic, or at least difficult to parse, whatever you do is going to get interpreted by one side or the other, or both, as you pointed out. So,
right.
How are the highways? How is the act of driving all over these places?
Well, I'm driving the highways, and I'm driving the back roads, as you can imagine, because I'm seeing different things on the highways than on the back roads. The highways, I'm very careful to make sure that sometimes, again, I can't believe I haven't been stopped and pulled over. I remember I'm already pulled over on the side of the road, but I photographed the digital billboards and the billboards because that in itself is a book. There's a book in these thanking the world. I saw a sign the other day on a digital billboard that said, "Thank you, scientists," which was a first. I'm photographing everything. Thank you, workers. Thank you, police. Thank you, all religious leaders or whatever it is. So there's a lot of that on the road. And there are a lot of signs that say, stay at home, practice social distancing. So I'm photographing all these things. It's funny that you asked that too, because one of the things early on was that the highways were pretty crowded.
Yeah.
Where I live, and when I was traveling, there are a lot of people coming and going, but yet the malls would be either closed or not crowded. People were, and I think it says something to the idea about practicing social distancing. They may have been going to meet some people in a park, or I don't know. But I can tell you this: there's a lot of people speeding.
Well, there's that article within the first couple of weeks. There was an article about the guys who are regularly breaking the Cannonball Run record.
Yeah, well, there's no question.
That run from New York to California is just, the number just keeps dropping, again and again.
No, I can tell you this. My anecdotal experience has been that the traffic is moving at 80 miles an hour now. No kidding, So there are a lot of bad driving and there's a lot of fast driving, both, for sure. The back roads are, people are speeding, and I would say they're driving a little faster than they normally speed. But the highways, I'm telling you, everybody's flying. And again, I think the state police, the regional police, the local police, I think everybody's come to the conclusion that the more people are pulled over, the more chance there are people getting coronavirus, coming down with COVID-19.
Yeah.
So I think that there's a what's the word? A calculus going on here about what's worth pulling people over for, what laws are worth enforcing. And I think
given that the police themselves are putting themselves at risk, every time they interact with people. So, yeah.
There's no question about that. But I also think that there's I think it's something that you would probably want to talk to somebody else other than me about, because it's in the news all the time where there's some people who are doing some pretty naughty things with regard to lack of social distancing or defiance of, no matter what state it is, defiance of the regulations of what stores and businesses can be open, where police have shown up and said, nothing to see here. Sorry, nothing to see here, carry on. And in fact, they've chosen not to make an arrest, or they've chosen not to do that. Now that's
break it up. Yeah.
That's those are the judgment calls that the police and their governor or their town supervisor need to work out. I am not going to get in the middle of that, although I've seen some people do some pretty nutty things and nothing happened. Again, I try to stay as far away as possible. That's the other thing that I've learned, by the way. A lot of things came together for me, Gil. I've been thinking for a long time, for instance, that part of not making a perfect picture is just to open my lens up wide. I have a 24 wide lens, and let it capture everything that I'm looking at, rather than looking for someone's face or to show that someone's smoking a joint in the background. So by necessity, I've had to open up my lens, and that's been good. That's been good for my sensibility. And the other thing is, one of the things I came to realize over time while I was cataloging any number of things, including, for instance, memorials. I call them RIP memorials on cars. So-and-so died, RIP, but they're on cars. And all of these other things is that, for me, how do I say this? I would be photographing mailboxes and cars and murals and all of these things all in one day. And I realized, when I was done, I would then categorize them and catalog them in my own internal filing system. And I couldn't figure out how to do what I really wanted to do, which was to actually do a large photograph with 36 pictures in them, 36 different images, all shot on the same day. And then I realized this is my moment to do that. So I am no longer taking all of the pictures that I take in one day and say, okay, here are the murals I took on that day. Here are the people in masks I took, or here are the people who are not wearing masks. And here are the people who are running illegal businesses. And here's an American flag or whatever, and separating them out. I'm actually now categorizing everything by day. It's not anymore about individual.
Yeah, the subject of the picture as opposed to the day it happened, the chronology of it all.
I was just going to say it's a travel log.
Yeah.
And so that's part of the reason why I've had to unlearn some of my own instincts about organizing things and about cataloging. So instead, this has been more of a let's just say an experience in a cultural moment.
Yeah. Do you think that would carry over post what we're going through? Do you see that as a new phase for how you're approaching work, or do you think it's tied specifically to the nature of this experience?
Yeah, I think it's the nature of the experience. For me, it may be different for others.
No, that's, I mean,
but,
for you, do you think after this, I can get back to shooting categories of things, but for now, it needs to be the world in its entirety?
Well, I'm shooting the world in its entirety. I'm thinking about it now as one extended existential moment. So I'm not I don't yank things out and say on, May 15th, here's all the mailboxes and here's all the antique cars and here's all the roadside memorials and here's the handmade flags. I'm putting them all together because it's all part of this travel log. So for me, I think, it's a very complex way to view things for me. It's very hard to look at things that way without categorizing them, because it's you have to literally and figuratively look at things as an expanse. So it's hard to do that when you're traveling, 150 to 300 miles a day on a road trip and say, all right, it's all part of the same thing. Because I don't generally, it's counter to the way I think. But I'm forcing myself to do that because of this soup, I guess, that I'm stirring,
Yeah.
It's complicated. I know that sounds
No,
not
I
very
mean,
specific, but
trust me, there's a weird thing I do with my books when I'm done reading them that I stopped doing during this whole thing. That is one of those, I don't need to see things the way I saw them before all this began. I can change, and this wasn't important to how I was, relating to my books. So yeah, no, I get just conceptually what you're going through. Obviously, in your case, it's the centerpiece of the art you make or how you approach the world. But yeah, that's all I'm wondering. Do you think it's a phenomenon that will continue for you after this, or is it tied into, the nature of the soup, like you were saying?
Yeah, I think it's the soup. I have to tell you, I think I'm telling a different narrative that I'll never be able to tell again. You know what I mean? I think this is really different. But I know you're the interviewer and I'm the interviewee, but could you just tell me a little bit about the books?
Oh, the book thing, it's just a dumb little practice I have. And it's going to sound incredibly trite, and that's why I didn't want to say it in relation to the way you shoot books, or you shoot the world. It's just when I finish books starting January 1st, every book I finish that year, just stacks up beside my leather armchair downstairs. And at the end of the year, I line them up, take this big picture, and basically show everybody else, you're not reading enough because I'm me. And I had this stack going from January through late March. And I was just looking at it thinking, what the hell are you doing this for? Why does this stack need to sit here? Why you keep track of everything you finished. Why do you need this pile of books just sitting right here? What is it telling you about how you're approaching the world, how you're reading, etc.? Then I just reshelved everything and thought, end of the year, maybe I'll put them all back together and take a picture, but they don't need to be here as a constant reminder to me of either how much I'm reading or how much I'm not, which is, for me, it's what I was doing for 6 or 7 years leading up to this. To me, that's a change. And I know it's an incredibly trite change compared to normal people and what they're doing. But
no,
yeah,
it's not.
Yeah.
It's not trite. That's not trite. Let me tell you something. I hope you'll appreciate this, or I hope your listeners will appreciate this. Let me tell you what I did because of you. My mom died in late February, and my mom was a literary editor. Mm-hmm. She was actually the managing editor for the Raritan Review for almost 20 years, and she reviewed books, and she was a reader, and she had a library that was the kind of library you'd want to interview someone about because it was a library. So anyway, she died, and we had to clear out her library and her books, and I had some books that I've been wanting to read across the spectrum of things. And I took some books that I wanted to read because my mom had given them to me, or she was interested in these books that were in her in her room in her facility, and she hadn't gotten to them. And because of you, by the way, I in early March, I made a stack of books, put them all in one place, and said, this is what Gil would do. And I stacked up every book that I wanted to read this year. And my wife said, what are you doing? What is this? I said, I'm going to make a stack and show Gil that I read all these books this year. So it's not trite. I mean, I've never done this in my life, but I knew the only way that I was going to read any of these books, I may not get to these 30 books, but the
Just to
only way I
have
was
them in
going to
front
read
of you, yeah.
but to stack them up in one spot.
Nice. Maybe it was a spiritual thing, and I was exorcised, and it possessed you instead. That's awesome.
No, my hand to God, so to speak. I'm telling you, This is what I did, and I did it because of you, and I did it after you interviewed that guy who had that unbelievable collection of books.
Mm-hmm.
I listened to that interview.
Alberto Manguel. He was the guy who had to move like tens of thousands of books from France back here. Yeah.
But who's the guy who he bought a house just for the books?
Oh, that was him, Manguel.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I loved the interview, and I loved the way you both talked about books. And I started thinking differently about books. And I realized that part of the reason that I don't read enough books anymore, I'm a voracious reader, but I don't read books enough anymore. It's not just because they're hard to hold and hard to, to deal with, but it's because they're not in front of my face.
Yeah.
And so, anyway, I thank you for that, because at the very least, I'm looking at these books now every day.
Right.
I know, and I started one.
I've been keeping a spreadsheet of everyone I finished since 1989 because I'm insane. But, I also work down here in my library, and that's where my home office is. So I'm always surrounded by these things. I have a book cart set up with books for future guests of the show, so I know where those are. Those are like your stack. Those are the ones I know I have to get to because those are the people I'm going to be interviewing sometime. So, organizing that. But go on.
Did you ever get a chance to get in touch with Samuel Friedman? He was writing that book. I can't remember if it's published or not. He's writing this. He talks about it a little. He's a journalism professor now at Columbia. He's writing a book on Hubert Humphrey. That sounds really, really interesting.
His name's familiar, but I don't recall reaching out to him. I'll have to look at my email.
He's a New York Times reporter for many, many, many years, and now he's a Columbia journalism professor, and he's writing editorials for the Washington Post, and I don't know if it's Haaretz in Israel, but he's a really good guy. He graduated high school the same place I did, but 4 years ahead of me.
Oh, that's right. You wrote me about him in March. So that was the point at which my life was not straight. Yeah. So let me put a pin in that one so I can go back and check it out. Yeah.
And I mentioned that apropos to this thing about books. He's written many, but I think he's the kind of guy that might have an interesting take on this whole thing about cataloging, organizing books, and everything like that. He's a super interesting guy. Anyway, enough of that. Sorry, but
I appreciate it. You know me, I'm always looking. Now I'm in the position of looking for new leads in addition to recording with past guests. I now have to start looking at future past guests, as I call them. So
anyway, I don't know if you know this. I actually think Sato Mughalian mentioned him in your interview. She audited his journalism class, and
that's the making of the book person. That's right. Yeah,
that's right.
I knew it was a familiar name.
Yeah. Anyway, enough of that. So sorry. Well, that's my story for now. Does anything else you want to ask me?
No, just who you would have picked for the NBA Finals this year. That was pretty much the last question.
Well, I would have to put together an all-star team for that. I don't know that I could pick anybody. I still can't. I don't see how they're going to play. I don't understand how they're going to play. But they're trying to play. I don't understand how a lot of this is going to come down.
There's to me, there's too much risk. But as you've seen from the rallies you've covered, other people want to take the risk, or they don't consider the risk to be. They consider the benefits to outweigh the risks, I guess. The problem is they're considering everyone's risks to not be as good as their personal benefits. So,
you know what? Can we talk? Let's talk about one more thing. Let's talk about one more thing that I've been thinking about. If you don't mind, you don't have to include it if you don't want. But that reminds me of something that I've been listening to, hearing a lot.
Mm-hmm.
And this is not to pass judgment, and it's my anecdotal impression.
Sure.
But what I'm hearing from people leads me to believe, including my own daughter, not that she's expressing these sentiments, but my daughter never had the 7th grade civics class that she should have had. And she didn't in 12th grade. They make you pass a health class in 12th grade, or once you're in high school, I guess you learn about the disease and contraception or whatever. But there's no class for civics anymore that I know of. Certainly where my daughter went to high school and where some of my friends' kids went, there's no civics class. But it seems to me that one of the things that's changed a lot, and what I learned is that, we talk about these rallies and what I'm hearing and everything, and you're saying that people feel that there's no risk. A lot of people feel not only that there's no risk, but they're calling it, I'm sure you've heard this thing, it's called a plandemic, not a pandemic.
Yeah.
It's part of that conspiracy narrative. But along with that, there's this strong libertarian view that you can't, and I'm hearing this all the time. I'm seeing it in signs that are at the rallies. I'm hearing the speakers at the rallies say it. I'm hearing people tell me this at the rally who attend. It's a vibrant part of the narrative, the visual and vocal spoken narrative. And it goes something like this. Don't infringe upon my rights. Don't tell me what to do. If I want to keep my business open and people want to come to my business, that's okay. I'm going to do it. And by the way, up yours, that kind of thing. It's part of this idea that I'm a rugged individual and the government can't tell me what to do. And so I occasionally will speak to some people, from a proper distance, and ask them some questions. Never passing judgment. And what I get and what I gather from it is that we're back to that kind of civics class. I don't think many people that I've encountered, particularly, not just that, but particularly these rallies, I don't think they really have a handle on really understanding government, let alone democracy. I mean, I don't know that I've spoken to anybody who's vociferously talking about, opening the economy and, their rights and not to want to have to wear a mask and all that. I don't think I've heard anybody who's ever really had any concept or conception of that, in a democracy, particularly ours, hopefully still to this day, it's changing a lot. Things are changing, but, this notion that, you have freedom of speech, but you don't have the right to say, yell fire in a crowded movie theater. I know it's a cliche, but it's a basic concept about our society. And then conversely, I see rainbows in windows and on cars that say we're all in this together. And it's an acknowledgement that you should wear a mask because it's good for everybody, or, whatever. I'm not advocating. I'm just telling you that there's that other side. But what I'm really hearing is a lot of is a kind of lack of a basic understanding about the construct of government and the notion of the greater good. And I don't know if that sounds like a pie in the sky thing, but I think it's been lacking across the board, certainly in the public places that I've photographed. Let's leave it at that.
Yeah.
And
no
I
editorializing,
think
but yeah.
Right. But I think that's the fundamental, gap right now, let's say. I think if there's anything, the one thing that's divided, and I don't think there's any doubt, I mentioned it and alluded to it before, I don't think there's any doubt that part of that has to do with the Trump presidency, for good or for bad. I think that there's this heightened sense now that, I got to look after myself, and the government doesn't have the right to tell me how to look after myself, and I'm less concerned about the guy down the road, and so don't tell me what to do. And I think that's what's to me, in my mind, anecdotally, of course, that's the divide. I think it's less a political divide and more a spiritual and conceptual thing. I think, and it has to do with people's understanding of their place in the United States of America with regard to their relationship to their government. Mm-hmm. So if there's any one thing I've learned, I think it's that more than anything else. People's relationship to their government is fundamentally different on the left than on the right, and those in support of Trump and those not in support, and those who are not in support of Trump. That's the fundamental thing. It's that they see themselves in a different kind of relationship to and with their government. And I never would have picked up on this if I hadn't been out there listening and taking pictures.
Yeah.
I know.
I would say any hope of it improving, but that'll take us another hour to talk through. So.
Well, no, I get that, but my point is that I just think that there just aren't enough. I don't think people understand government.
Yeah.
The basic,
my role as a lobbyist, I have learned a lot about the way it works in a way that I didn't, having a basic, outside understanding of, bicameral legislation, blah, blah, blah. Once you start to interact, with the, between the procedure, the personalities, and the nature of power, you learn a lot more. But even, just the procedural aspect, I only had a scant knowledge of. So, now that it's part of my day job to understand this stuff, what can get proposed, what can get enacted, et cetera, my understanding is much greater than the average bear, as it were. But yeah, it's a different world.
Well, very well.
Well, we'll talk soon, man. And I want to see more of the pictures, at least when they're publicly available. I'll make sure we share them with the listeners.
Well, what I'll do is I'm going to send you some. I can't remember. I know you don't do the Facebook thing.
I do Instagram and Twitter, but I did look at your Allentown ones. So.
Yeah, I'm in the process of getting some stuff up on Instagram. It just takes me a long time to get it done and sort it out because I have to resize them because they're not shot from my cell phone. So you got to go through an app and everything. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to send you a portfolio of pictures that I posted on Facebook. There's 45 of them, I think. Very interesting things that I photographed in one day in Wilmington, Delaware, and in Philadelphia. There's this company, this 100-year-old Italian restaurant called the Victor Cafe. It used to be a record store 100 years ago, but they wanted to keep their employees busy and working, so they started doing takeout. And the employees are opera singers because it's a sing. So every night, Thursday through Sunday, they sing arias off the balcony of this building in South Philadelphia, and a crowd forms on the street. It's spectacular. So I'm going to send you those. If you want to post a few of them, go right ahead. Sure. There's a little narrative that I included. I'll just email them to you in a medium size, so you can just drag them and use them. I won't send them large, and you can feel free to throw a few up there. They're let's put it this way. I think they're safe. Yeah. You know what I mean? So you wouldn't have to worry about anything touchy with the Trump. The Trump rally stuff is not included. So
understood.
I'll do that.
Cool, man. And send me a proof of life picture, and we'll get this up in another day or so.
A proof of life, right?
And that was Jonathan Hyman. His website isn't super up to date, but it's JC Hyman Gallery, which is JCHYMAN gallery.com. His Instagram is Jonathan_Hyman_photography. Again, Hyman is HYMAN. It sounds like he's most active on Facebook, but I don't have an account there and can't check. But you should look for him there. Same thing, Jonathan Hyman, and maybe add photography. And check out his amazing photos from these travels. He sent me a whole bunch from the Philadelphia, Baltimore, Annapolis segment, some of which I include in the show notes for this one. And we'll be back tomorrow with another COVID check-in episode. If you want to send me a little update to read on the air or have something you want to share with the listeners, let me know and we'll set something up. I'm at groth18@gmail.com. You can find my contact info at our websites, vmspod.com and chimeraobscura.com/VM. And you can find a link to the COVID-19 sessions at both sites with all of those daily episodes. You can also subscribe to the Virtual Memory Show via iTunes, Spotify, YouTube, or whatever podcatcher you like to make sure you get every episode. You can find the links to that at the COVID-19 sessions. Now, in the before time, I always recorded in person, but now I'm using Zencastr.com so I can record remotely and get high-quality audio at the end. If you're interested in finding out more about it, it is spelled Zencastr, so Zencastr, but no final E. There's a free hobby level and a pro level that costs $20 a month. I use that, but other people I know get by just fine with the free one. And my Patreon supporters more than cover the expense of the show, and my day job, of course, does too, since all I'm spending now is $20 on that and $20 on Libsyn for the hosting service for all these podcasts I'm putting up 6 days a week. because I'm not spending money anymore on all these in-person shows that took up parking and tolls and subway trips and everything else. So what I want to say to you is help other people. Go find artists and writers and other creative people, or just people in need. Go to their Patreons, Kickstarters, GoFundMes, Indiegogos, tip jars, Venmos, coffees, whatever, and help. And if you don't feel comfortable helping individuals out, then give to charities like your local food bank. Just try to help people who are in need right now. Now, I am Gil Roth. It is Friday, May 22nd, 2020, and this was a bonus episode of my Virtual Memory Show podcast. Thanks so much for listening. Keep the conversation going, stay safe, and wash your damn hands.